Welcome. If you don't already have one, this evening's service will be led out of the little booklet, the Minyan booklet that you'll find in the lobby at the back. Tonight is all about remembering Maurice. Taking a moment to pay tribute and to celebrate, even as we grieve. 99 and a half years young. One of the Jewish traditions is to do something called tearing kriya, which is tearing a garment. And when we tear a garment, it's a symbol that our hearts are broken and you can't see that our hearts are broken. And so we tear something external so that others might recognize the brokenness inside of us. But today when I came to Neil to say, we discussed this, would you like to tear a garment? He said, but my heart isn't broken. I don't feel the need to do so. Truly a strong metaphor for a life well lived. So I'll invite you to think of him. Think of this remarkable man. Think of the ways that he has touched you. Think of the times you shared, the celebrations, the joys, the hardships. Perhaps a tennis match. Birth is a beginning and death a destination. Life is a journey from childhood to maturity and youth to age, from innocence to awareness and ignorance to knowing, from foolishness to discretion and then perhaps to wisdom, from weakness to strength or strength to weakness and often back again, from health to sickness and back we pray to health again, from offense to forgiveness, from loneliness to love, from joy to gratitude, from pain to compassion and grief to understanding, from fear to faith, from defeat to defeat to defeat, until looking backward or ahead, we see that victory lies not at some high place along the way, but in having made the journey, stage by stage, a sacred pilgrimage. Birth is a beginning and death a destination, but life is a journey from birth to death to life everlasting. And so this evening's service will be a brief evening Mariv service, a memorial service, and most importantly, an opportunity to hear from the family a few tributes in their own words. We rise on page 4 for the call to prayer. Please feel free to join me, whether in the Hebrew. I'm sure, like Maurice, you all are fluent in the Hebrew and the Aramaic. Feel free to join me in the Hebrew and English. We do have transliteration, or simply take a moment for personal prayer or meditation, or think of Maurice. Ultimately, that's what we've come to do. Please rise. Baruchu et Adonai hamevorach, Baruch Adonai mevorach, leolam va'ed. Please be seated.
Baruch ata Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, אשר בדברו מעריב ערבים, בחוכמה פותח שערים ובתבונה משנה עיתים, ומחליף את הזמנים, ומסדר את הכוכבים במשמרותיהם ברקיע כרצונו. בורא יום ולילה גולל אור מפני חושך וחושך מפני אור, ומעביר יום ומביא לילה, ומבדיל בין יום ובין לילה, אדוני צבאות שמו, אל חי וקיים, תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד, ברוך אתה אדוני, המריב ערבים, אהבת עולם, בית ישראל, עמך אהבת, עמך אהבת, תורה ומצוות, חוקים ומשפטים, אותנו לימדת,
אותנו לימדת. על כן אדוני אלוהינו בשוכבנו ובקומנו נשיח בחוקיך ונשמח בדברי תורתך ובמצוותיך לעולם ועד, כי הם חיינו ואורך ימינו, ובהם נגה יומם ולילה, נגה יומם ולילה, ואהבתך אל תסיר ממנו לעולמים. ברוך אתה אדוני אוהב עמו ישראל. שמע ישראל, אדוני אלוהינו, אדוני אחד. ברוך שם כבוד מלכותו לעולם ועד. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך. והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך. Page 13. ויאמר אדוני אל משה לאמור, דבר אל בני ישראל ואמרת עליהם, ועשו להם ציצית על כנפי בגדיהם לדורותם, ונתנו על ציצית הכנף פתיל תכלת. והיה לכם לציצית וראיתם אותו, וזכרתם את כל מצוות אדוני ועשיתם אותם, ולא תטורו אחרי לבבכם ואחרי עיניכם אשר אתם זונים אחריהם, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם אמת. On page 15, if you'll join with me at the bottom of the page. In a world torn by violence and pain, a world far from wholeness and peace, give us the courage to say there is one God in heaven and on earth. The high heavens declare your glory. May earth reveal your justice and your love. From bondage in Egypt, we were delivered. At Sinai, we bound ourselves to your way. Inspired by prophets and instructed by sages, time and again we overcame oppressive forces. Though our failings are many and our faults are great, it has been our glory to bear witness to our God, keeping alive in dark ages your vision of a world redeemed. Let us continue to work for the day when the nations will be one and at peace. Then shall we rejoice as Israel did, singing on the shores of the sea. מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נדר בקודש, נורא תהילות אוסף אלה, נורא תהילות אוסף אלה, מלכותך ראו בניך, בוקע ים לפני משה ומרים, דהלי ענו ואמרו, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. ונאמר כי ברא אדוני את יעקב, וגאלו מיד חזק ממנו, ברוך אתה אדוני, קהל ישראל. On page 18, if you'll join with me at the bottom of the page. Grant, O God, that we lie down in peace, and raise us up, our sovereign,
To life renewed. Spread over us the shelter of your peace. Guide us with your good counsel. For your name's sake be our help. Shield and shelter us beneath the shadow of your wings. Defend us against enemies, illness, war, famine, and sorrow. Distance us from wrongdoing. For you, God, watch over us and deliver us. For you, God, are gracious and merciful. Guard our going and our coming to life and to peace evermore. Baruch ata Adonai, Shomer Amo Yisrael La'ad, blessed are you, Eternal One, Guardian of Israel. Please rise on page 20 for the Chatzi Kaddish.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, בעלמא דברה חירותי וימליך מלכותי, בחיי חונו וימיכונו ובחיי דכל בית ישראל, בעגלה בעגלה ובזמן קריב, ויאמרו אמן, יהי שמי רבה מבורך, לעלם ולעלמי עלמיה יתברך, יתברך וישתבח ויתבר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי קודשה בריחו לילה מנגל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה תאמירן בעלמה ויאמרו אמן. And so we come to the Amidah, or the Tefillah, the standing prayer, beginning on page 22. Our tradition is to chant the first three of the benedictions as a community, and then to continue in silence, whether using the words of the prayer books in Hebrew or in English, or the words of our hearts, or simply think of Maurice. Page 22. Please be seated when you've concluded your personal prayer. Adonai sefatei tiftachu fi yagidei latecha, baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu ואלוהי אבותינו ואימותינו, אלוהי אברהם, אלוהי יצחק ואלוהי יעקב, אלוהי שרה, אלוהי רבקה, אלוהי רחל ואלוהי לאה, האל הגדול, הגיבור והנורא, אל עליון, גומל חסדים טובים וקונה הכל, וזוכר חסדי אבות ואימהות, ומביא גאולה לבני בניהם, למען שמו באהבה. מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן, ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם ועזרת שרה. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיי מתים אתה רב להושיע, משיב הרוח ומוריד הגשם, מזריח השמש ומוריד הטל, מכלכל חיים בחסד, מחיי מתים ברחמים רבים, צומח נופלים ורופא חולים ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לישני עפר, מי כמוך בעל גבורות, ומדום מלך, מלך מימית ומחיה, ומצמיח ישוע, ונאמן אתה להחיות מתים. ברוך אתה אדוני, מחיי המתים. אתה קדוש ושמך הקדוש, וקדושים בכל יום יעללוך סלע. ברוך אתה אדוני, האל הקדוש. Please be seated. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן. יעשה שלום, יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, יעשה שלום, יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, יעשה שלום, יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, יעשה שלום, יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, יעשה שלום, יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל. on page 61.
We're assembled with our friends in the dark shadow that has fallen on their family. We raise our voices together in prayer to the source of life, asking for comfort and for strength. We need light when gloom darkens our lives. To whom shall we look, if not to the Creator of light? We need strength and courage when pain and loss assail us. Where shall we find them, if not in the thought of the one who preserves all that is good from destruction? We are blessed if we have never yet passed through trials and bereavements. Some present here bear fresh wounds in their hearts, and therefore feel more keenly the kinship of sorrow. Others whose days of mourning are more remote still recall the comfort that sympathy brought to their sorrowing hearts. Our rational minds know that all things pass. Emotionally, though, it is so hard to accept that all that lives must die. All that we prize is but lent to us, and the time comes when we must surrender it. We are all travelers on the same road, which ultimately leads to the same end. So I'll invite you to join me on page 64 in the words of the 23rd Psalm in English. A psalm of David, with God as my shepherd I shall not want. You make me lie down in green pastures. You lead me beside still waters. You restore my soul. You set me in circles of righteousness for the sake of your name. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil. For you are with me, your rod and staff, they comfort me. You spread a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of God forever. On page 67, this poem by the famous Israeli poet Zelda. Lechol ish yeshem shenatan lo Elohim venatnu lo aviv veimo. Each person has a name. We each have a name given by God and given by our father and our mother. We each have a name given by our stature and smile and given by our attire. We each have a name given by the hills and given by the walls. We each have a name given by the stars and given by our friends. We each have a name given by our sins and given by our yearnings. We each have a name given by our enemies and one given by love. We each have a name given by celebrations and given by our work. We each have a name given by the seasons, given by our blindness. We each have a name given by the sea, and ultimately one given by our death. Please rise for the memorial prayer. El male rachamim shochen bamromim haמצי מנוחה נכונה תחת כנפי השכינה עם קדושים וטורים כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים את נשמת Maurice Henry Slonim, משה בן שלמה שהלך לעולמו בעל הרחמים יסתירהו בזדר כנביו לעולמים ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתו אדוני הוא נחלתו וינוח בשלום על משכבו ונאמר Amen. Fully compassionate God on high, to Maurice who has entered eternity, grant clear and certain rest with you in the lofty heights of the sacred and pure, whose brightness shines like the very glow of heaven. Source of mercy, forever enfold him in the embrace of your wings. Secure his soul in eternity. O God, he is yours. May he rest in peace, and we say, Amen. And so our concluding prayer is page 72.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות ולא זמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם וגור עלינו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו 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 אחד. Before we come to Kaddish, Temple Beth Israel acknowledges that the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are the first people of Australia, the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional owners of the land on which Temple Beth Israel is located, for which they've never ceded sovereignty. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present. And so we conclude the service, the formal part of the service, with the words of the mourner's Kaddish. These words do not speak of Maurice, they do not speak of grief, of sadness, or of loss. Rather, they recognize God's presence, even and perhaps especially at a time of sadness and loss. Interestingly enough, it was written in the vernacular, but being Judaism and tradition, they kept it in the vernacular of 3,500 years ago, just so that you would all understand. I would assume that you all speak fluent Aramaic. In that context, we do say it as is traditional in Aramaic, but I'll give you a translation of the last few lines in a few moments. If the family would like to join together in the words of the mourner's Kaddish. Yitkadal. Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabba Mavarach Leolam Ulal Me'almaya. Brichu. Amen. Amen. May the one who creates harmony on high bring peace to us, to all of Israel, and to all of humanity. And we say, Amen. Please be seated. And so we've concluded the formal part of our ceremony, the liturgy. But ultimately, we've come here to celebrate this man. In the prayer by Zelda, it speaks, each of us has a name. And the names that were given to Maurice were always about being kind, gentle, and epitomizing the word mensch, a good man. Who better to speak of him than those who knew him the best and loved him the most? And so his family have prepared a few words. Would you come forward and share those now? Yes.
Just checking. This is a good part. This is what you've come here for. Welcome to the celebration of our dad's life, a life well lived. We'd like to pay our respects to our elders, the Slonim family matriarch Norma, the last of the 4 Slonim siblings, and we're delighted that the last of the 9 Poole family siblings, Mum's family, Doreen, is with us. I'd like to say good morning to Max Slonim in New York at 3:30 a.m. He is up, he texted me before, hey guys, and his wife, fiancée Catherine, and Catherine's parents Jay and Joan, and we look forward to the wedding in the US in July.
Phoebe too's watching.
Oh, and Phoebe's too.
And the Poole family.
And the Poole family as well. And everyone else who's watching out there and who's watching here. I'm Pete and Sharon, Pete and Sharon are skiing in Japan, so don't break a leg, Pete or Sharon. I'd like to thank Cantor Laloom for the beautiful service this morning. Dad's now resting peacefully with Alex on one side and Mum on the other. Now it's our opportunity. I'd like to start by recounting the story of how Dad and Mum came to be married, as this speaks to the values of both families. Bruce will talk later about Dad's career, but after he graduated from medicine in Melbourne, he went to Perth for his internship, where he met Mum, who was a trainee nurse, but unfortunately Mum had contracted TB whilst caring for soldiers who returned from the war. A friendship turned into love, and Dad and Mum both decided they wanted to share their lives together. Then it got a little bit tricky. The Pools came from English convict stock. They were a working class Protestant family, and they'd never met a Jew before. And here was this little Jewish doctor who wanted to take their daughter away to Melbourne. But after they got to know Dad, he became one of the family. The Slonims, however, were a little more challenging. Surprise, surprise. Dad knew that if he married a non-Jewish woman, it would cause his father great heartache. So he was torn between love and family. Ultimately, Mum helped him resolve his dilemma. They were sitting on a park bench in Perth's Kings Park when she said to him, "I'm going to walk around the park, and when I come back, if you're not here, then we'll never see each other again. But if you are, you're going to ring your father and tell him we're getting married." So typical of Mum. Dad was still sitting on the bench when she returned, and I'm confident to say that it was because he truly wanted to marry her rather than he couldn't make up his mind. But the decision was made and he had to tell his father. True enough, it didn't go down so well, and his father disowned him, causing great pain for all parties. Some weeks later, influence from Dad's mother led to his father, Papa, flying to Perth to meet Mum. He was swayed by her love of Dad and her goodness. He relented and actually became Mum's biggest supporter. This would not have been easy for a man who was a pillar in Melbourne's Jewish Orthodox community. So the decision to marry was based on love and took courage, compromise and understanding, not just from Mum and Dad, but also their families. The Pools loved Dad and the Slonims loved Mum, and we are blessed with wonderful cousins on both sides. So Mum and Dad came back to Melbourne, where they lived with Dad's parents, whilst his father oversaw Mum's conversion to Judaism under Rabbi Dr. Sanger, right here in 1949, one of the first ever conversions that was conducted here. Not long after marrying, they moved to Warwick-Nabil, which Bruce will talk about shortly. We left Warwick-Nabil to come to Melbourne in 1962. And Dad and Mum had no friends. They had family but no friends. So TBI became their second home, and they developed lifelong friendships with many people, and the kids became friends too. They were actively involved in many aspects of TBI affairs and did lots of little things behind the scenes, like polishing the silver and maintaining the gardens. Mum and Dad enjoyed close personal relationships with Rabbis Levi, Morgan and their wives. After Dad's retirement, they became regular Saturday morning worshippers, and Dad would sit in the first seat in the fourth row, occupied by his dear godson Ian Samuel. Firstly with Mum and Alex, and then with my godmother Marge Greenberg and her husband Harry. Thanks, Joe. They would hold hands and sing along to Sim Shalom, and you could see the eyes of the people up here on the bimmer light up as these old folks were singing along, holding hands. It was beautiful. When Alex's mum and the Greenbergs passed away, as well as all his contemporaries, he'd often lament, "All my mates are gone." But all the regulars knew him, and they watched out for him. For some years he would drive himself to shul and drop off at Helen and Ross's afterwards for lunch. We were becoming increasingly concerned about him driving, which was reinforced one day when I got a call from the shul suggesting that, based on his parking out the front where he had a special spot, they thought that perhaps he should think about giving away the keys. We were told they're regulars who would be happy to drive him to and from shul. Dad was reluctant but agreed to stop driving, and he adjusted to using half-price taxis to get around to most of his activities. But there was always someone to help him to get to shul. Dot Nathan's late brother Peter was one of them, although Dad wasn't that keen on Peter's cautious driving, which was quite something, as Dad was a terrible driver himself, and by the time we'd got the keys from him, there wasn't a panel on the car undamaged. None of them his fault, mind you. Being hard of hearing, he tended to speak loudly, and there were many times when the congregation overheard him pass inappropriate comments about parents not controlling wayward kids or a woman wearing a very short dress. The regulars nearly always thought it was very funny, not so sure about the subjects of some of his remarks. At Shield yesterday, it was hot admittedly, at Shield yesterday there were people in shorts, sandals, t-shirts, tracksuits, and I chuckled at what Dad would have had to say about that. COVID was challenging for him, but it meant he couldn't go to shul each week. But with the introduction of the TBI online up there, he became an avid participant on his iPad. And he'd sit up at the kitchen table, kippah and tallit on, and he'd follow the service. Getting used to the iPad was a bit of a challenge, but he worked on the theory that if he pushed enough buttons, he would eventually get on, and remarkably, he nearly always did. Same thing with the phone. If any device didn't work, he'd just push more and more buttons, and if on the odd occasion this ultimately failed, it'd be the phone's not working again. It's all the fault of something else, the phone or the iPad. About 4 years ago, the cantor asked Dad if he'd like to be part of a wonderful TBI initiative in which volunteers would lead regulars in compiling a pictorial book of their lives. Carol and Paz spent nearly 18 months with us on this project, and in the process she and Dad formed a bond. And although she never met Mum, she came to know her very well too. In fact, Caroline and Mum are so similar you could easily have passed as her eighth sister. Convert to Judaism, a little bit feisty, and always taking on way more tasks than they should. Right, Daron, Nachon? The end result was this beautiful book, which has always been and always will be a cherished memory of his amazing life. Thank you, Carolyn. No doubt Dad's commitment to his health was a primary factor in such a long and productive life. As a doctor, he practiced what he preached. I remember him coming home from the surgery complaining that one of his partners smoked cigarettes whilst the other smoked a pipe, all whilst treating patients. In his younger days, he played golf, tennis and squash, and later he took up running, following the lead of Alex, my godfather, who was a fitness fanatic. Dad went to gym. He was doing aerobics well into his 80s. He played table tennis well into his 90s. He did fun runs. He ran every day to the end of Brighton Pier until his knees gave away, and then he walked. Everyone knew him and would say, "Hello, Maurice." He did his daily exercises, including 30 minutes on the stationary bike, regularly bemoaning his inability to do personal bests. He was active in U3A, Probus, local walking groups, gardening groups and Jewish care. And he wasn't happy a couple of years ago when the walking group organisers politely suggested for his own health that he should no longer do long walks. Mum having dementia was a key motivator in his almost obsessive focus on keeping active. Aside from his physical activities, his daily routine included several hours of reading the paper, cover to cover, crosswords, Sudoku, and reading books. He was widely read and remained on top of local and world events, always keen for a discussion. His mantra was busy, busy. "What have you been doing today, Dad?" "Busy, busy" was the standard response, never a still moment. He was fiercely independent, sharp as a tack, quick to dispense instructions and thought he was always right, which often to my annoyance he invariably was. I never heard him raise his voice. He never swore. He left all of that to Mum. As strong-willed and independent as he was also kind and caring. Over the years, and especially in recent days, I've been told by countless people how much they appreciated what he'd done for them. Dad was not a man of the book, as were his forebears, going back as far as the Baal Shem Tov, but when it came to the Jewish value of chesed, acts of loving kindness, he was at the top of the tree. In addition to caring for people, he also had a passion for nature. He loved gardening and growing plants from seeds and cuttings. That way it didn't cost so much. When we moved to Melbourne, bonsais became his passion. He was a founding member of the Bonsai Society of Victoria, where he was the oldest and longest serving member, 52 years. He travelled to Japan and South Korea to advance his skills, and he learnt with masters and became a renowned bonsai enthusiast. A number of his bonsai mates were at the service today and are here tonight to pay their respects. The president of the Bonsai Society, in an email to the members on Friday, wrote about Dad. He was a highly respected man, known for his intelligence, humility, friendliness and kindness to all. In his quiet and considerate manner, he willingly and graciously helped us all by sharing his bonsai knowledge, exquisite skills and techniques. Some consistent themes here, don't you think? His bonsais were his babies, and he spent untold hours with them. On weekends we'd come home and ask Mum, "Where's Dad?" And the answer invariably was, "Outside with his bonsais." We never showed any interest, but when he went into care 18 months ago, I said to these guys I'd look after them until we worked out what we were going to do with them. Long story short, they're now my babies, and they live on through me. Every day I water them, I think of Dad. From my father, I learnt that in life, family is the most important thing. I share his faith, his love of gardening and bonsai, and his commitment to keeping physically and mentally active. On the flip side, I readily acknowledge, that I drive as badly as him. I'm bull at a gate, Kerry, and I lack a filter. I don't think I'll ever be as gentle and caring as Dad, but I'm working on it. Up above us, behind me, above the ark, the tablet in Hebrew writing is the 10 Commandments. I won't score my siblings and I on all 10 of them, but I can confidently say that our parents would score us top marks for number 4, honour thy father and thy mother. But how could we not? They were the best. Before I hand over to Helen, I want to express my gratitude to Kerry, Max and G for the love, done well so far, for the love you've shown Dad over all these years and the support you've given me over the last week.
I'd like to talk about Mum and Dad's love of travel. Their first big adventure together was in 1949. Dad had finished his time at Royal Perth Hospital and he had convinced Mum to leave her life and family in Perth to embrace a new life, a new family and a new religion in Melbourne. Crossing the Nullarbor was no mean feat in these days. The roads were unmade, very little traffic. They encountered Afghans and camel trains on the way. Maybe this is where their love of the Great Australian Outback began. They travelled extensively throughout Australia in their camper van well before the time of the Great Australian Grey Nomad Exodus. They also enjoyed many overseas trips, tours to Israel led by John and Robin Levi, Europe, Asia, Africa, and then to England, where Mum spent much time researching her family history. When Ross and I headed off on our travels, Mum and Dad would always accompany us on the start of our journey and would always meet us on our return. We shared many happy times and many challenging times. One of the highlights would have to be the Flinders Ranges, where we camped together, Mum and Dad in their camper van and we were in our caravan. Mum was beginning to show signs of dementia and liked to stay close to the camp. On the other hand, Dad couldn't keep still and had to be occupied every minute of the day. One early morning, Ross, Dad and I set off for Mary's Peak. At the beginning of the walk, the track was well defined. As we climbed, the track became less defined. The rocks became bigger, and Ross and I were definitely not enjoying the experience. At this stage, Ross and I looked at each other and said, "No more." However, Dad refused to give up. He wanted to reach the peak. No amount of gentle persuasion or threats would deter him from going on. Of course, he ignored us and continued the climb. Ross and I slowly returned on the path, stopping every group that came behind us, asking if they had seen a 76-year-old little fella striding up the rocks. We were too frightened to return to Mum without him, so we just had to sit it out until he returned. He did eventually, with a big smile on his face, proud that he had conquered the mountain. Mum always loved travelling with us. Ross loves looking in antique shops and stopping for morning teas. Such a highlight for Mum, because she was never allowed to do this with Dad. He was always in a hurry to get to the next stop and would often find our slow pace too frustrating. In talking about my parents, Mum was an absolute perfectionist. Dad was so messy. We always questioned how Mum could cope with the mayhem he created around the house. When Dad retired from his medical practice, Mum stated that she would retire from cooking, even though she was a magnificent cook. Dad took a vegetarian cooking class and we enjoyed delicious stuffed pumpkin and mushroom pate. He became quite proficient with a stir fry and certainly challenged Mum's more traditional fare. Even to this day, I try to channel Mum's beautifully considered and creative ways, but often end up in total chaos. I know then Dad is by my side.
I'd just like to talk about Dad's career, which is obviously a large part of his life and our life too. But when Dad graduated in 1946, it was the returning medicos from the war that took all the positions in Melbourne where he had trained, which is why he ended up in Perth. But there, in his training, he developed a real interest in anaesthetics, surgery and obstetrics, and of course an interest in Nurse Isabel Poole. But when he returned to Melbourne, to use his skills, he chose Warwick Nabil as the place where he wanted to live. He could use his skills there, and he was also the local veterinarian. But those years in Warwick were the best years of our life and probably their life as well. We did lots of things in Warwick. We went for picnics, holidays, Rosebud was important, family was important, golf. But there were often times when we were about to head off on a picnic and it all stopped. There was a lady in labour or someone in the hospital that needed his care. Dad had a fantastic veggie garden in Warwick Nabil, and I'm sure, and fruit trees, and I'm sure that's part of where his interest in gardening and nature began. He had an active role in the community, most notably in Rotary, served on many committees. But Mum and Dad had a really active and lively social life in Warwick Nabil and maintained their friendships there for many, many years. In our house in Warwick Nabil, the front room was the surgery and next door was the waiting room. And so we lived in a house where there was antiseptic smells wafting through the house. There was always instruments and gloves to wash and dry. There was an examination couch and microscopes. There's also a drawer of jelly beans. And when we weren't caught, we were able to partake of those little jelly beans in that drawer. Always remember patients knocking on the front door, knocking on the back door, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and Dad was always there for them, showing great compassion and commitment to his patients. For his own family, the term rub it with a brick became very important. It didn't really reflect the care that he provided for us, and it probably, part of the reason was he was always chasing us around the house when needle time came. So rub it with a brick is folklore in our family now, and reflects not necessarily the way we care for our family, but in recognition of Dad in his years past. I remember in those early years going on ward rounds with Dad in the local hospital. I'd sit in the car and sometimes be welcomed to home visits. In my earliest years, I can't remember when I did not want to become a country GP. I could never explain that. Dad could never explain that. But I assume it's part of his commitment and his dedication to his profession that really influenced my decision. We never discussed why we chose professions, but we had a lot of interests that we share. We both had difficulty retiring, not that I've retired, but I'm getting close, but Dad worked into his 70s as well. The decision to move to Melbourne in 62, mainly for our education, our Jewish education, was a difficult decision. Just before I moved to Corowa, I did a long locum for Dad while they travelled overseas. So I sat in his rooms in Bay Street, in his desk, trying to decipher his writing, which is dreadful, as is mine. But I got to meet his patients, I did his ward rounds, I did his visits to the nursing homes, I did his anaesthetic lists. And I got a real appreciation for the sort of doctor he was, and I hope I've been able to aspire to some of those values. We both shared an interest in acupuncture. Dad went to Sri Lanka to train, and I did some years later, and that's another interest that we shared. Dad was a lifelong member of the AMA and College of GPs, and he was still reading medical journals just recently. And when there was an outbreak of Japanese bee encephalitis in Corowa, he got on the phone and saying, "Tell me all about it." He's been reading it in the Age, and he just wanted to know. And this is just last year. The last year haven't been easy for Dad, but he did remain mentally sharp till the very end. Family gave him his greatest joy, especially in recent times. He would just say, "I want to live a little bit longer to see those great-grandchildren just grow up." He would sit at family gatherings and just simply watch the children play. His youngest great-grandchild, Tommy, would sit on his knee. Tommy's just one, and they would look at each other. I would have loved to have known their thoughts at that time. He repeatedly said how proud he was of his extended family. Fortunately, we all had a chance to say to him how grateful we were, to him and to Mum, to have had the upbringing we all had. And he can be justly proud of what he has achieved, and we made that very clear. I'd like to acknowledge Neil and Helen, along with their partners Kerry and Ross. He has 5 grandchildren: Georgia, Max, Olivia, Sophie, and Phoebe. And he now has 8 great-grandchildren, and they are Tewila, Siosi, Atena, Remy, Mila, and Tommy, and Amina and Sufyan. And I thank them for the level of support they provided to us and for Dad over many years, particularly in recent times. I just need to also mention just how amazing Neil has been, and Kerry, and their family in caring for Dad, especially in recent times. But there's 2 phrases we've already heard that probably sum up Dad's life, and we all hear these and have heard them just so many times. One was busy, busy, which Neil mentioned, and the other one was beautiful family.
You better thank your beautiful wife too.
I'd also like to... Well, I mentioned Gail and Kerry.
Did you?
Yeah.
Well, you didn't say they were like... Oh, what Bruce didn't mention about our wives, Gail and Kerry, who regularly call us Maurice. And I don't think they're being complimentary, but we're pretty happy about it and we can live with that.
Georgia and Sophie would just like to say a few words on behalf of the grandchildren. So, thanks, girls. I'll leave them.
You all right? Shall we? Yeah.
Hello, everybody. I'm speaking today on behalf of my sisters, Olivia, Phoebe, and myself, Gramps' grandchildren, and his 8 great-grandchildren, Tewila, Siosi, Atena, Sufyan, Amina, Remy, Mila, and Thomas. Gramps was a wonderful grandfather, and I always remember the fun we had together and his accompanying chuckle as he chased us around, pushed us on swings, and watched the joy in us as children. And again, as he sat back and observed the beautiful chaos of his very noisy bunch of great-grandchildren. He was very proud of us all. The pride he showed on his face really did form part of his smile, and he loved hearing about what we were up to, where we were studying or working, and always if we were happy. When we were living in Bentley, my maternal health centre shared the same building with Gramps' U3A meetings. I took my first child Remy in as a newborn one day, and he waved me into the room in the middle of a meeting, standing up the front holding the baby for show and tell at the age of 93. I'll never forget just how proud he was to be showing her off. He felt this joy in the presence of his family right until the very end. He was even toe-tapping and hand-waving as the girls performed their shows for him in Mayflower only weeks ago. As my family and I are currently living at Nan and Gramps' unit at Dendy Street, I think of them often. It takes me right back to our beachside visits as grandchildren. As a family, we often go on Gramps' walk down the beach, past their seat and to the end of the pier and back. Something Gramps did every morning before having his cut up oranges, even running it up until the age of 80. The morning after he passed, I took this walk to visit their seat. And after mentioning the day before to Helen that it had been years since I'd seen the swans that used to feature so heavily on the route, I saw two black swans flying gracefully together, making their way out across the ocean. I can't help but think this was Nan and Gramps together at last, flying off away from the bathing boxes that were so much a part of their lives, living by the beach and our memories of them. Gramps, we adored you so very much and we will miss you greatly. Your presence in our lives has been so wonderful and we feel so lucky to have had you with us to the age of 99. Rest in peace, Gramps.
My brother Max is in New York right now, dialed in online with Kat. I'll be speaking on behalf of both of us, and this is something we wrote together. Yeah. My brother Max and I were very lucky to grow up with Nan and Gramps living closely nearby. It's a great privilege to have had a grandparent with you for some 30 years, doubly so when they lived just around the corner. Some of our earliest and fondest memories are of visiting Dendy Street. When we were young, we would run up what seemed like the world's longest driveway to be greeted by warm hugs, blackcurrant juice and ginger biscuits. Gramps loved spending time with us and would take us down to the beach for a swim, followed by cold outdoor showers down the side of the house. We would play endless games of memory together at the kitchen table, straining our eyes to see what incredible treats Nana was preparing, just as much as we were focusing on the games themselves. One of Max and I's favourite activities was slipping our hands down the side of the couch in the den, looking for loose change that had fallen out of Gramps' pockets. Somehow, there were always plenty of coins to be found, much more than could possibly fall out of a pocket. As we grew older, we enjoyed having Shabbat dinner at home every Friday. Gramps and I would compare our different school and uni experiences, and him and Dad would share stories with us about their time in Warrnambool. Some weeks, Gramps would bring with him a piece of paper with some scribbly doctor writing on it that only he could read. As it turns out, it might have been on purpose, because he'd proceed to read aloud a joke that some thought was beyond him, but we found to be more hilarious each and every time he did it. Then at the end of each Shabbat, Gramps would give his 10 out of 10 rating for whatever delicious meal Mum had made, no matter what it was. He was just grateful to be there. and we were grateful to have him. These dinners are some of our most cherished memories. It can be hard to pin down someone's true impact while they're living, particularly someone like Gramps, who was always running around busy. Maybe it's only possible to understand them when they've passed, because it's only then that they sit still long enough for us to see them clearly. It's with this clarity that we're able to appreciate Gramps for who he was and what we had for so many years. He was a patriarch and a role model. He taught us to be passionate in our interests, to look after our bodies and minds, and above all, the importance of family. This was on full display late last year, on a glorious summer's day when our extended family gathered together to celebrate Dad's 70th birthday. The sun was shining, his kids, grandkids, and great-grandkids were smiling, and he was able to sit there and reflect on it all. Very good too, he said. And it would be impossible for anyone else to disagree.
What a truly remarkable story. A tribute to a remarkable man, kind, gentle, and truly omnipresent for all of us, because none of us were here before him. In just a moment, I'm going to invite the family to precede us into the lobby. And as we leave, we get to have an opportunity to share a moment with them. Try not to say, "How are you?" It's such a hard thing to not say to someone who you really want to care for and extend condolences to, but if there's a day not to be okay, this is it. Instead, share an anecdote, a memory. Something about Maurice that begins with, "I remember when." Those will be the most cherished of memories, the most meaningful and comforting. And if you go home and think of something else, send an SMS or an email, or call. Truly, those are the memories which bring the most comfort. They can be sad, they can be funny, they can be a celebration. I'll ask you all to remain where you are for a moment as the family precede us. Jewish tradition is that we wish them long life. He had that. Or of simchas, that we should meet in times of joy, the kinds of times that he would have wanted to share with all of you. Or as I said at the cemetery, bis 120, may you all live till 100 as if you were 20. This is what he would have wanted. He almost got there. If the family precede us, just give them a moment to arrive into the lobby, and then we'll join them. I wish you all long life, and truly that we should meet of simchas in times of joy rather than in times of sadness.